Hello, and welcome to History 300, the origins of the First World War. Lecture 14, the Austrian reaction, June the 29th to July the 4th, 1914. The bodies of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie arrived back in Vienna on the night of July the 2nd, 1914, 4 days after their assassination in Sarajevo. Their lying in state, memorial service and funeral were all completed a day later. Just as she had been persecuted by Austrian court officials during her life, so Sophie was given little dignity at her death. The Emperor had not forgiven Franz Ferdinand's decision to engage in a morganatic marriage. He did not attend the funeral, and he asked that no other European royal representative attend either. Even the couple's children were not allowed to see their parents before their burial. The two were interned far away from Vienna in a small chapel in Artstetten. The implicit Habsburg line was that the dead Archduke and his wife were an embarrassment who were now to be quietly forgotten about. On hearing the news of his nephew's death, Franz Joseph is said to have mumbled, "For me it is a great worry less. God will not be mocked. A high power has put back the order I could not maintain." But while the aging emperor was unmoved by the assassination itself, he was conscious of the affront that it represented to the Habsburg dynasty. For good or ill, Franz Ferdinand had been the heir to the imperial throne. Honour had to be satisfied. If Serbia had been complicit in the plot, and rumours of all wild kinds had begun circulating in Vienna within hours of the news of the assassination arriving, then that upstart kingdom would have to be punished ruthlessly. Franz Joseph did not seek war, but he was resigned to it if necessary. Franz Conrad von Hötzendorf, better known to history simply as Conrad, chief of the Austrian General Staff, was not merely resigned to war. He was enthusiastic about it. From the first moments of hearing the news of the assassination, he had declared that Belgrade had to be behind the plot. For Conrad, this was a golden opportunity. He had been pressing for years for a preemptive war against Serbia in order to destroy this Balkan threat to the empire once and for all. The chief obstacle to such a war had been no less than Franz Ferdinand himself, who had felt that Austria-Hungary was in too fragile a condition to consider major hostilities. Now that the chief obstacle to an attack on Serbia was gone, Conrad pressed vigorously for a showdown. As early as June the 29th, Conrad began insisting that the government mobilise in preparation for war. Count Leopold Berchtold, Austria's foreign minister, was more uncertain. Of all the senior members of the Austro-Hungarian government, Berchtold was probably the one man who was most genuinely upset by Franz Ferdinand's murder. But he was far less sure than Conrad about whether aggression against Serbia was wise. Berchtold had a well-deserved reputation for wavering and indecision in previous diplomatic crises, however, and it may have been his fear that he would once again seem weak that encouraged him to take a harder line this time. On June the 30th, he told the German ambassador in Vienna that the time had come for what he called a final and fundamental reckoning with Belgrade. Later that day he went to see the emperor, who concurred with this assessment. But Franz Joseph, who was concerned above all with imperial unity, insisted that before any action could be taken, Berchtold had to ensure that the Hungarians were in full agreement. This was where the dual nature of Austria-Hungary's government became a key issue. Austria and Hungary, you may remember, were effectively two independent states, united only by the person of the emperor himself and by a small federal government. Berchtold would have to seek approval of the Hungarian Prime Minister, István Tisza, before he could proceed against Serbia. Tisza was deeply reluctant to consider war with Serbia, something he made clear from the first moment he was asked. This was not because he liked Serbs. On the contrary, Tisza disliked them intensely, and he was worried that the likely result of a war with Belgrade would be the annexation of Serbian territory, thus bringing more Serbs into the empire. Austria-Hungary already had too many Serbs than was good for it, so far as Tisza was concerned. Their presence made it more likely that the empire would eventually enact constitutional change, diminishing Hungarian power, a long-term project that Franz Ferdinand himself had been highly enthusiastic about. Many Hungarians were frankly quite pleased that the meddlesome heir to the throne, a man they considered their nation's enemy, was now off the scene. So Tisza played the role of dove in the ensuing deliberations with Berchtold. He insisted in a personal plea to the emperor that it would be what he called a fatal mistake to go to war with Belgrade. He accepted the idea of ratcheting up diplomatic pressure on the Serbs, but he wanted, above all, a public commitment from Vienna that if a conflict did break out, Austria would take no territory from Serbia. He also wanted an assurance that the Germans supported Austria's actions. Indeed, everyone in Vienna knew that if they were to proceed against Serbia, they would have to have the support of Berlin. So on July the 2nd and 3rd, the emperor prepared a personal letter to the German Kaiser asking for assistance, while for his part Berchtold drafted a longer memorandum outlining a plan to isolate Serbia in the Balkans. Count Hoyos, Berchtold's deputy, was assigned to personally deliver both documents to Berlin. He left on July the 4th, in what would become known to history as the Hoyos Mission. Okay, next week we'll look at the immediate reaction to Franz Ferdinand's assassination elsewhere in Europe, as well as the results of the Hoyos mission to Berlin, the German government's notorious blank check. See you then.